Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed, ready to begin a new day. Today is Thursday, July the 18th, and we have another opportunity to spend the day together. I don't know where you are tuning in from, but today here in New Hampshire, it's a little overcast. We had a pretty good rain last night, and so everything is pretty damp this morning. But given all the heat that we've had, it's kind of good to have it kind of knocked down just a little bit. We are in the midst of a new series this summer, and we're calling it the Songs of Ascent. They are from Psalm 120 through 134 in the book of Psalms. These psalms were traditionally sung as people would go up for the gatherings of worship in Jerusalem. So they tend to be short, almost like little choruses. And no doubt they were sung by the pilgrims as they were on their way to services of worship, to remind them again of certain attributes of God, certain calls of God that he has on our life. It was a way of promoting a life of discipleship, right? Walking in step with God and his will and purposes. Now, as those series are unfolding, you can find all those messages on bethanychurch.com. If you go to our media page and pull it down, you'll have all the sermons there as part of the ongoing series. And this past weekend, I preached from Psalm 131. And so that sermon is posted, but we're also doing something unique this summer, and that is traditionally we do a video feed to all of the campuses. But one of the things that I also like to do at probably about 20 times a year is to give the other pastors an opportunity to preach. It's a way of raising up all of the other leaders at Bethany, giving them a platform. And so this summer, we're going around live to all the campuses. So during the summer, you'll get to hear from a number of the preachers here at Bethany, and as they bring a word, all of which is in this whole series of Songs of Ascent. So I believe in Greenland this week, Pastor Shay Fitzgibbons will be preaching, and then we have Dan Elliott, I think in Kittery, and Brett Olson over in Raymond. So it's going to be a good weekend. What I'd like to talk to you today is just following up a discussion that we've had on Psalm 131. Psalm 131 is a psalm all about pride and the antidote to pride. It starts off by saying, my heart is not proud, O Lord, and my eyes are not haughty. Neither do I think or wonder about things too wonderful for me. But this one thing I have done, like a weaned child is with its mother, so is my soul with the Lord. And then he says, O Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forevermore. And so this whole idea then of making certain that we are putting our hope in God is one that comes as a response of what are we to do with pride when it rears its head in our life. Well, I preached a sermon about that, and I picked the theme of pride. And so we've been looking at the book of Daniel this week, just as give us another glimpse of this topic and see how that unfolds also in the scriptures. We've looked at King Nebuchadnezzar, who was having a rough time sleeping, and he had a dream. And in chapter 2, Daniel is able not only through the revelation that God gives him, but he was able to become aware of the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had, but he was also able to interpret it. It was a dream of this huge statue, had a head of gold, a chest of bronze, arms and legs of iron, feet of a mixture of iron and clay. It's, when we use that expression, feet of clay, this is where it comes from. This is part of this revelation of the scriptures that will often, you know, invade our culture, right? It's like you'll find in Daniel chapter 5, there's a story about how the Spirit of God begins to write on a wall. And so we have the expression now, like, well, the writing is on the wall, right? Um, so this is another one of those indications of how the scriptures, impacts culture. But Daniel then interprets the dream. God gives him a special place. Nebuchadnezzar seems to come around, right? He says, "Oh, your God is the Most High," and he gives all this laudatory, praise. But by when you begin to read chapter 3, as we did yesterday, you find that what Nebuchadnezzar received out of the interpretation from Daniel was that he was the head of this, huge statue in his dream. The statue and his head was filled with gold, right? Daniel told him that all of the various parts of the statue represented different conquering nations, right? They were each going to have their turn in the sun. The greatest of which would be Nebuchadnezzar, hence his head is made of gold. But the others, they would become less and less inferior until finally God's going to come. He's going to smash the very base of this statue, fixed with iron and clay. The whole thing is going to come tumbling down, and it's God's kingdom that will stand forever. But it doesn't seem like Nebuchadnezzar gets that picture, because the next thing you know, in chapter 3, he's erecting a 90-foot statue, 9 feet wide, made of gold, and he places this as a monument to himself and to his kingdom, and then forces everyone in his kingdom to come and bow down to it. So he gathers all of the leadership throughout his country, brings them all together. It's a big festival. All this music is playing. And then he says, when you hear the sound of that music, I want you to fall prostrate before this statue that represents me and my kingdom. And the only problem was that Daniel's friends of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they determined that there's only one that they will bow the knee to, and that is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so even though they are in a foreign land, they refuse to do so, which puts them then in this fiery furnace. And if you know the story, right, God delivers them from this fiery furnace. It's interesting how the 3 of them are thrown in, but there's a 4th one walking in that furnace. Many commentators believe that's the pre-incarnate Jesus, because remember, Jesus wasn't just like ourselves. We weren't just born into this world in a space and time. Jesus came as Messiah in space and time, but we are told, for instance, from the opening words of John's gospel, where he says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." He was in the beginning with God. So Jesus's beginning far extends to that of which is only God, lives. He was there. He's eternal, and he's divine. And yet Jesus would take on flesh and dwell among us. And on that day, we see how God has sent his Messiah into the world. Well, Jesus, it may very well have been him in that fiery furnace. And he rescues these 3, and they come out, and they're unsinged. They don't even smell like smoke. And again, the response from Nebuchadnezzar is, "Oh, how great is your God? Nobody's ever going to speak badly about him." But it doesn't ever seem to really turn the heart of Nebuchadnezzar. All of these signs and wonders don't seem to be enough to have him cross this line of faith. I thought, as we were thinking about this, and I'm mentioning King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, the nation responsible for destroying Jerusalem and its temple. They were a fierce people. So when you're reading these stories and you're reading about Nebuchadnezzar, I want you to realize who you really are dealing with. So if I put here in the notes a reference to the book of Habakkuk, and I thought maybe that would be a good place to just take a look. If you looked at Habakkuk and turn to chapter 1, Habakkuk is registering his complaint before God. He's saying, "Listen, I'm talking to you about all the violence, the injustices that are in this world, and it doesn't seem like you're doing anything." And God says, "No, I am doing something, but you're going to be amazed. You're not going to believe what you hear." And what is that? God's about to tell him that because Israel has chosen a path where they have turned their backs on him, God is about to judge them like he promised he would judge the nations of the world. See, there is no favoritism with God. Not you. No one can just say, "Hey, well, look, I'm part of God's family and I'm good." No, no. What makes you a part of God's family is that you share God's DNA. It means that I look at the world differently. I live differently. I find that I am now being called to love him with my heart, mind, soul, strength. And I am also called to love like he loves. It's always other centered. It's always a little sacrificial. Now we're not going to do that perfectly, right? Because the injunction is found throughout Scripture for us to continue to pursue him. But God is going to mold us, and a little bit more of this world will be, chipped away, and we're going to be conformed more and more into the image of the one who gave his life for us, Jesus, right? So for the prophet Habakkuk to hear that God is about to judge Israel the way he judges the wicked nations, and to use one of those wicked nations as a tool, it was too much for him to bear. But notice the description of what God says about these Babylonians. And that's the point that I want you to get this morning, because we're talking about King Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel, the king of Babylon, the one responsible for bringing this judgment on Israel. And I just wanted you to see the kind of person that he is and the nation that he is representing. In verse 6, he says, "I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong, their horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture swooping to devour. They all come bent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They deride kings. They scoff at rulers. They laugh at fortified cities. They build earthen ramps and capture them, and then they sweep on past like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own strength is their God." See what I mean? This is a revelation now that is given to Habakkuk about this nation that is about to invade them. And God is going to use them as a tool. He doesn't he's not responsible for the evil that Babylon does, but this is the Lord basically saying to the nation of Israel, you want to act like them, then you could be like them, and look what happens. And consequently, what we find is we're given a vision now of Babylon that is fierce and a force that is unstoppable. Well, that's who King Nebuchadnezzar is representing. He's the king of this nation, and so you begin to see that this king Nebuchadnezzar is troubled, And he's got a pride issue, right? That needs to be, contained. So let's look at chapter 4 in the book of Daniel now, because this interaction between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, this is continuing. Look here in chapter 4. I'd like to spend some time this morning with you on this. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar, this is him writing, right? To the peoples, nations, and men of every language who live in all the world, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. Wow, what a word of praise coming from the likes of Nebuchadnezzar. Did he finally come to his senses? Like, what happened? Well, we're about to be told. In verse 4, he says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, contented and prosperous. I had a dream that made me afraid. Isn't that amazing? The king who injected fear in the surrounding nations is made afraid by a dream. He says, I was lying in bed. The images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. Isn't that so interesting? What maybe the sword and the armies could not do, a dream did. It terrified him. It made him afraid. It robbed him of sleep, no doubt. He couldn't get these images out of his head. And so what does he do in verse 6? He says, so I commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be brought before me to interpret the dream for me. When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, diviners came, I told them the dream, but they could not interpret it for me. Finally, Daniel came into my presence, and I told him the dream. He's called Belshazzar, after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him. Right? So it shows you again. Here is King Nebuchadnezzar, feeling like, listen, I'm putting this team of gods together for me. They're going to be like the Avengers, right? Each one has his own special place, and the Israel's God is just like one among them. But that's not the place that God is satisfied to be. He is Lord of lords, King of kings. There is no God like him. He's created all things, and he holds it all together. So as the story goes on, you just see, yeah, this is not going to turn out well. So he says, I, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you. This is Nebuchadnezzar talking, right, to Daniel. And he says, and no mystery is too difficult for you. Here's my dream. Interpret it for me. These are the visions I saw while lying in my bed. I looked down, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large, strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the beasts of the field found shelter, and the birds of the air lived in its branches. From it, every creature was fed. Doesn't sound like a bad dream. But then notice here he says, in the visions I saw while lying in my bed, I looked, and there before me was a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, cut down the tree, trim off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field. Well, what happened to this beautiful tree? So majestic, so imposing. Didn't look like anything would be able to stand up against it. And now the next thing you know, it's cut down. It's the branches are trimmed off. It seems like it's just going to be cut up for firewood. And all of the refuge that are provided and all the food that are provided is reduced to nothing. And then it also goes on, and this messenger says, "Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass before him." The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest of men. So in this dream, he sees this imposing tree, beautiful, majestic, powerful, and in one fell swoop, the tree is leveled. And all that it produced is now for naught. And now it's saying here that it's going to be bound. So who is this tree? What does it represent? And how did it go from a tree to someone now? Is he talking about the tree itself going to be drenched with the dew of heaven? But this tree seems to be living still, right? It says, let him live what? With the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass before him. So it seems like all of a sudden this tree is really a metaphor for a person. And it doesn't seem like it's going to go well for this person. That 7 times is referring to a period of time. It could also be a year, as you're going to find in verses that follow in Daniel chapter 4. So it says, so it ends here. It says, but before we get to the end of Nebuchadnezzar sharing this dream with Daniel, notice he comes to a conclusion here in verse 17, that this decision is announced by the messengers of the Most High, and this verdict is sure. And he says this Most High, who's giving all the orders, who's calling the shots, is what? Is sovereign over all the kingdoms of men. And it is he, right, this Most High, that gives them to anyone he wishes. So God is the one who is responsible for for the kingdoms of this world. He allows people to thrive, and he is the one that's also going to bring justice. This is the dream that it says here in verse 18. This is the dream that I, Nebuchadnezzar, had. And now Belteshazzar, which is Daniel, right? This is the name that the king had given to Daniel, trying to remove the influence of Israel from him. You change his name, you're hoping to change his identity, but what he could not do is change his heart. Daniel is all about his relationship with God. And so while Daniel stands there in service to this king, he says to Daniel, says, listen, none of the wise men in my kingdom can interpret it for me, but you can. And he recognizes, because Daniel is different. There's something about the spirit of this holy God that is in him. He doesn't really quite get it yet. Again, remember, I'm telling you, it's like it's like the roster for Nebuchadnezzar. No doubt, taking gods from all over and putting them into his own pantheon of gods. But God is not sufficient there, and this dream is telling King Nebuchadnezzar that. He's saying God is sovereign over the kingdoms of men. You notice God is sovereign over this mighty tree that now has fallen and reduced to firewood. Daniel now is about to interpret these words, and so this might be a good time now for us to pause, and we'll come at it again tomorrow for its conclusion, because like so much of the Old Testament, especially when you read these narratives, you have to read through sometimes a whole story to then come to the conclusion that God wants you to receive. And it's a powerful one here at the end of Daniel 4. And it has everything to do with the pride that we experienced in Psalm 131. So think about this relationship that God has with this fallen creation. He's still sovereign. As you think about the world that we're in now, sure, the times have changed, but God is the one who remains seated, enthroned, sovereign over the affairs of men. How the mighty have fallen. We see that refrain being played over and over and over again. We contrive, we plan, we do all our things, but it is God who directs our steps. And God will use the evil for the day of good. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar is all about himself. God's about to teach him a big lesson. And so, why don't we pause here? And Lord willing, we'll come back tomorrow and we'll finish up this story. And I'm sure you won't be disappointed. Thank you so much for tuning in today on this Thursday, July the 18th. I trust that you go out, seize the day. I hope that one prevailing thought that God, the Most High, is sovereign over all the affairs of men. So then, whom shall I fear? I serve the one who sits enthroned in the heavens and who has made the earth his footstool. God bless you, my friends. Thank you so much for being a part of today. Seize the day, never forgetting that God is good all the time. God bless, my friends.